Varatari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjanam Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bharadari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bharadari Yasodanandana Prajajanaranjana Yamunatira Panachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori Ki Jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani Ki Jai, Gonitai Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 74, Text 31 and 32. We're chanting Text 31 together. Isho durachyayati, Isho durayayaha kalam. Iti sachavati shrutihi. Vitanam apiyad buddhir. Balavakyar vibhidyate. Isho durachyaya kalam. Iti sachavati shruti. Vritanam apiyat buddhir. Balavakyar vibhidyate. Isho durachyaya kalam. Iti sachavati shruti. Vritanam apiyat buddhir. Balavakyar vibhidyate. Please chant. Isho durachyaya kala. Iti sachavati shruti. Vritanam apiyat buddhir. Balavakyar vibhidyate. And the word for word, Isha, the Supreme Controller. Durachyaya, unavoidable. Kala, time. Iti, thus. Sachavati, truthful. Shruti, the revealed statement of the Vedas. Vritanam, of elder authorities. Api, even. Yat, since. Buddhi, the intelligence. Bala, of a boy. Vakyai, by the words. Vibhidyate, is diverted. And the translation, and this is King Shishupal talking, addressing the assembly at the Rajasuya sacrifice that has just been completed. Shishupal said, the statement of the Vedas that time is the unavoidable controller of all has indeed been proven true, since the intelligence of wise elders has now become diverted by the words of a mere boy. And there's no purport. And text 32. Yuyam patra vedam shresta mamandyam balabashitam sada sas patayan sarve krishno yat samatoriyane. And the translation for text 32, and this King Shishupal continuing to talk. O elders of the assembly, you know best who is a fit candidate for being honored. Therefore, you should not heed the words of a child when he claims that Krishna deserves to be worshipped. So there's no BB2 purport. Om Jnanatimrandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svam Rupagadam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Padakamlam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapsa Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Panchakalpa Tarubhya Shakrupa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Ramapada Swami Iti Namine Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'll just reread text 31. Shishupal said, the statement of the Vedas that time is the unavoidable controller of all has indeed been proven true, since the intelligence of wise elders has now become diverted by the words of a mere boy. So there is commentary by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur from Sarata Darshani, and it has him giving Shishupal's words. So he's rephrasing. So I'll read how Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur expresses King Shishupal's words. So remember, this is King Shishupal addressing an entire assembly. It's a Rajasuya sacrifice. It's just been completed, and this is what he says. O leader of the assembly, do not accept the words of a child by which Krishna was selected for the first worship. So that's Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, putting into different words Shishupal's statement to the assembly. And Srila Vishwanath continues saying that actually, according to the inspiration of Saraswati, the goddess of learning, there's another meaning to Shishupal's statement. And this is how Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur puts it. And King Shishupal also has to address his close allies. And this is what he says to them. This is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur understanding everything in terms of a person's innermost feelings and thoughts. So this is how Shishupal speaks to Duryodhana and the other members of the opposition. And he says, do not regard these words as a child's words. They are literally the words of the Vedas. So notice, he's saying two quite different things, it would appear. On the one hand, he's telling everybody assembled, don't accept the words of a child. He's referring to Sahadev, Maharaj Yudhishthira's brother, who spoke words of praise about Krishna. And he's saying, don't accept the words of a child, that Sahadev's a child, because that was how Krishna was selected to be the prominent personality who received worship at the Rajasuya sacrifice. And then, on the other hand, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is giving insight that King Shishupal is actually saying to Duryodhana and the members of the opposition, because also present in that assembly were those who were opposed to Krishna. And what he says to them is, don't regard these as a child's words. They're literally the words of the Vedas. So he's saying quite opposite things. So we're going to look at this. So the speech that's given by King Shishupal is also given by Srila Prabhupada in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I'm going to read a section of that speech. So this is how Shishupal is speaking, and Srila Prabhupada putting it in his words. Ladies and gentlemen, I can now appreciate the statement of the Vedas that, after all, their time is the predominating factor. In spite of all endeavors to the contrary, the time element executes its own plan without opposition. For example, one may try his best to live, but when the time for death comes, no one can check it. I see here that although many stalwart personalities are present in this assembly, the influence of time is so strong that they have been misled by the statement of a boy who has foolishly spoken about Krishna. Many learned sages and elder persons are present, but still they have accepted the statement of a foolish boy. This means that by the influence of time, even the intelligence of such honored persons, those persons in this meeting, can be misdirected. So that's Srila Prabhupada padding out, or how he's presenting King Shishupal's statement to the assembly at the Rajasuya sacrifice that's just been completed. So if one examines a statement regarding time, because that's what King Shishupal is putting a focus on, the predominating factor of time and how it's affected the persons that are assembled there and their judgment. So if one looks at statements regarding time, one can see what Lord Krishna declares. So here's Krishna, and I'm drawing from Bhagavad Gita. And this is what he says. Of letters I am A, and among compound words I'm the dual compound. I'm also inexhaustible time. Notice, I am inexhaustible time. And of creators, I am Brahma. So that's Krishna in 10:30 Bhagavad Gita. So Srila Prabhupada, he makes a generalization on this statement of Lord Krishna, because we're looking at the fact that King Shishupal is saying time is the predominating factor and how he's seeing time as having affected the intelligence of all the persons present there. And so we're looking at how we can put time in its proper context. And so Krishna has said, I am also inexhaustible time. And so Srila Prabhupada, he makes a generalization on the statement of Lord Krishna regarding his saying, I am inexhaustible time. And this is what Srila Prabhupada's generalization is. Among all kinds of killers, time is the ultimate because time kills everything. Srila Prabhupada's generalization. And King Shishupal, he's acknowledging this prevailing factor of time because he says the time element executes its plan without opposition. So it's very much like how Srila Prabhupada is generalizing that basically time kills everything, and King Shishupal is saying that time has its own plans and it can't be opposed. So all is well. Now, to reiterate Lord Krishna representing time, Krishna also says, among subduers I am time. So he's referred to himself as being inexhaustible time, and he says, among subduers I am time. That's Bhagavad Gita 10:30. And Srila Prabhupada gives a reason how it is that time represents Krishna. And this is the reason Srila Prabhupada gives. There are many subduing principles, but time wears down all things in the material universe. And so, therefore, it represents Krishna. It's the one common element. It's actually wearing down everything in the material world. I mean, you see bodies, they start out one way and they go into a big decline over time. Whichever body it is, whichever form it is, you see a material object, it starts out shiny and bright and sparkly, and over time it loses its sparkle and gets dense and may even fall apart. So time is acting. So that's Srila Prabhupada's giving the reason why time represents Krishna's, because there's many subduing principles, but time wears down all things in the material universe. That's Srila Prabhupada's generalization. So Krishna is that force that vanquishes in the material universe. He's that force. And he states it directly. Here's another statement of Lord Krishna's Bhagavad Gita 11:33. He says, "Time I am, the great destroyer of the worlds, and I have come here to destroy all people, with the exception of you Pandavas. All the soldiers on both sides will be slain." So again, reiterating, time I am, he says this again, the great destroyer of the worlds. Before it was, he's a subduer. So it's the force that's acting to bring about the destruction or the dissolution of things. So, so Krishna presents himself in that form of all-devouring time. That's in relation to the statement that he makes to Arjuna, how he's actually come to destroy all people. This is at the time of the Kurukshetra battle. Because he's saying that except for the few Pandavas, everybody present on the battlefield of Kurukshetra will be devoured by him, because he's representing time, and time destroys. So it's like having a meal. Everyone's going to be devoured. So that's Krishna, and looking at time, and it's no different from how King Shishupal understood it, except he left out the subjective element, that Krishna is that force. Krishna is literally representing time. He's literally the devourer. He's literally the subduer. He's that force. So that's the part that King Shishupal didn't get. But he understood time as the predominating factor. You can't oppose time. Now, King Shishupal is attributing the time factor in this particular context of what we're reading as having eroded the intelligence of the persons in the assembly. That's what he's saying. Time has caused the intelligence to decline. And this is evidenced by them having accepted the words about Krishna spoken by Sahadev, whom he refers to as a foolish boy. So one of those statements by Sahadev had been, so listen to the statement by Sahadev. Remember, these are words in praise of Krishna, and we're going to see how well it lines up with what Krishna says of himself. So this is what Sahadev spoke to the assembly, and this is the person that King Shishupal is calling a foolish boy, or a child even. Here's Sahadev's one statement. Anyone who wishes the honor he gives to be reciprocated infinitely should honor Krishna. The perfectly peaceful and perfectly complete soul of all beings, the Supreme Lord who views nothing as separate from himself. This is quite a beautiful statement, and that came in text 24 earlier in the chapter. So it's this particular statement in which Sahadev himself referred to the spiritual intelligence of all the persons present, because that's what we're looking at, because King Shishupal has seen the intelligence as having eroded of everybody that's present thanks to time. And here Sahadev, he's actually referring to the spiritual intelligence of all the persons present, because he says, that Anyone who wishes the honor he gives to be reciprocated infinitely should honor Krishna. So he's saying, utilize your intelligence. If you want to receive honor yourself or have it given to you infinitely, honor Krishna. And I'm going to read how Srila Prabhupada puts across the speech given by Sahadev. So here's Srila Prabhupada with Sahadev's speech to the assembly at the Rajasuya sacrifice. Ladies and gentlemen, it is superfluous to speak about Krishna because every one of you exalted personalities knows the Supreme Brahman, Lord Krishna, for whom there are no material differences between body and soul, between energy and the energetic, or between one part of the body and another. Since everyone is a part and parcel of Krishna, there is no qualitative difference between Krishna and all living entities. Everything is an emanation of Krishna's energies, the material and spiritual energies. Krishna's energies are like the heat and light of the fire. There is no difference between the quality of heat and light and the fire itself. He should therefore be offered the first worship of this great sacrifice, and no one should disagree. So that's Srila Prabhupada taking and expanding on the speech given by Sahadev to the assembly. So Sahadev states that the personalities that are present all know the Supreme Brahman. That's what he says. It's drawing from Srila Prabhupada's giving the speech of Sahadev. He says, it's superfluous to speak about Krishna because every one of you exalted personalities knows the Supreme Brahman. So he says to them, you know the Supreme Brahman. So we're going to look at what this means if Sahadev's saying all of you exalted personalities know the Supreme Brahman. Krishna gives a description of what happens when one knows Brahman. So here's how Krishna explains it, and this is Bhagavad Gita 13:14. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So, somebody who has this kind of knowledge of both the soul, because that's what Krishna is referring to, it means that somebody who knows that there's no specific date at which the soul or the jiva was born. A person who has knowledge that that soul has manifested from the Lord, meaning that it's beginningless. And somebody who has the knowledge that the super soul is the chief knower of the body. So within every body, in every single physical body, there's the knower, meaning the super soul. And he's the chief knower of the body. And the master of three ways of being, meaning material nature. He's the master of that. He's even controlling the nature. He knows the nature, the three kinds of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Then somebody who has this kind of knowledge understands that one is eternally in the service of the Lord. Because if you're walking around as the spirit soul, beginningless, having emanated from Krishna, and he's the super soul dwelling in the same body, who's the knower of the body, who's the knower of the three kinds of ways of being, material nature, then naturally one is eternally in service to the Lord. Because one's the individual soul connected, has that connection, one's emanated from the Supreme Soul. So this view of Sahadev, believing that the assembled persons have this specific understanding of the eternality of the living being and the relation to the chief knower of the body, is in contrast to the view that's presented by Shishupal. Because for Shishupal, the persons assembled have got eroded intelligence. So you see the contrast. Sahadev is seeing all the persons assembled as completely exalted and as actually having this knowledge of spirit, Brahman, whereas Shishupal is saying to them, all of them have eroded intelligence. Time has acted on them. The intelligence has eroded. The fact at this present moment, it's visible that the intelligence is eroded to him. So if these assembled persons are in knowledge of Brahman, which is what Sahadev is saying, then actually their intelligence, and these are Krishna's words from Bhagavad Gita 232, has passed out of the dense forest of delusion. That's what actually happens if one is carrying spiritual knowledge. It means that the intelligence has moved away, and the analogy is there that it's a kind of forest of delusion. So one has got so many delusions about oneself, about the world, about one's relationship with others, etc. But if one starts to carry this knowledge, spiritual knowledge, then actually one actually passes through those delusions, one leaves them behind. That's how Krishna explains it. So when your intelligence has passed out of the dense forest of delusion, this is Krishna, you shall become indifferent to all that is being heard and all that is to be heard. So it means that you can understand things how they are. It means that you're not actually going to be taken in by hearing something that's coming from a source that is more in the delusion arena. So notice how actually, if you contrast the views that are being presented by Sahadev of the personalities present there and of King Shishupal, they're quite different. Yeah. So this particular statement of Krishna, that when your intelligence is passed out of the dense forest of delusion, you shall become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard, it's referring to persons who factually understand their relationship with Krishna. Means those persons are indifferent, and this is interesting because this is how Srila Prabhupada explains. Those persons are indifferent to rituals of fruitive activities and have understood that the purpose of the Vedas is to reach Krishna. So he's expanding that kind of the delusion that is present in persons who are lacking this knowledge of spirit or Brahman. The delusion even it extends to the point of not understanding that even if they're performing rituals connected to trying to get the fruit of their activities, trying to get rewards, they haven't understood that the purpose of everything is to try to reach Krishna. They haven't even understood that. So it's a kind of delusion. So if one has gone past that delusion because one's carrying spiritual knowledge of the eternality of the soul and its relationship to the super soul, and therefore because of that eternal connection, the necessity to be in service to the Supreme Lord, then actually one is in delusion. So, so of course, all of this is of relevance that I'm bringing up because of the fact that Sahadev concluded his statement by saying that worship should be offered to Krishna first. And you can understand, because everything he said is in line with the Vedas. It's in line with what Krishna has said of himself. Now, we'll look at even further. In terms of Krishna being, and this was, again, Sahadev's statement, the perfectly complete soul of all beings, the Supreme Lord who views nothing as separate from himself. One can consider how this reflects perfectly Lord Krishna's statement from Bhagavad Gita 10:20. Krishna says, I am the super soul, O Arjuna, seated in the heart of all living entities. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. So see how it perfectly lines up with what Sahadev has said, because he has said the perfectly complete soul of all beings, the Supreme Lord who views nothing as separate from himself. Krishna understands that nothing's separate from him. And here's what Krishna says himself. I am the super soul, O Arjuna, seated in the heart of all living entities. I'm the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. And that particular verse, because it's very relevant, Bhagavad Gita 10:20, I'll read the Sanskrit too. Aham atma gudakesha sarva bhutasaya sthitaha aham adish cha madhyam cha bhutanam anta eva cha. So Srila Prabhupada states that Lord Krishna addresses Arjuna as Gudakesh, because in the Sanskrit, the first line is Aham Atma Gudakesh. It means he's addressing Arjuna as one who has conquered the darkness of sleep. So again, this idea of, going past illusion, darkness, the darkness of sleep. He explains further that for those who are sleeping in the darkness of ignorance, it is not possible to understand how the Supreme Personality of God manifests himself in various ways in the material and spiritual worlds. So that's the important thing. It's not actually possible to understand if one's in that delusion or in that darkness where you're not carrying spiritual knowledge. So this is of significance because King Shishupal is clearly failing to understand Sahadev's statement of Krishna being that perfectly complete soul of all beings. He's failing to understand it. The Supreme Lord who views nothing as separate from himself. That's what how Krishna puts it so perfectly. I'm the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. So King Sahadev is not understanding this point of Krishna being the Supreme Lord who views nothing as separate from himself. So there's a question one can ask. So this is where we've come to. If you have been treated unjustly and you feel resentment, is it proper to feel inspired or inclined to protest? So I'll read the question again, because you can ask this question. If you have been treated unjustly and feel resentment, is it proper to feel inclined to protest, either at that time or at a future time connected to your unjust treatment? You can ask that question. Is it proper to protest? Now, King Shishupal, he had, if we look at him, because he's the one who's now protesting in a big assembly of many exalted personalities, the huge Rajasuya sacrifice where Krishna has been chosen as the preeminent personality to be honored. King Yudhisthira is going to be the preeminent monarch ruling the whole world. And you ask this question, is it proper to feel inclined to protest because there's resentment perhaps of having been treated unjustly in the past on the part of King Shishupal? So we'll look at King Shishupal. What did he have to go through? Now, in the past, King Shishupal had many supporters. And at the time of his proposed marriage to Rukmini, there's this description in the Bhagavatam. To secure the bride, meaning Rukmini for Shishupal, the kings who envied Krishna and Balaram came to the following decision amongst themselves. So they were standing with Shishupal. They wanted to make sure that he married Rukmini. They decided amongst themselves, if Krishna comes here with Balaram and the other Yaduts and tries to steal the bride, we shall band together and fight him. So Shishupal had a lot of kings on his side, and all of them felt envy towards Krishna. Now, those envious kings went to the wedding with their entire armies. Like generally when you go to a wedding, you may come with your family. Not so these kings who envied Krishna, who were part of this agreement that they made amongst each other. They were going to make sure that Shishupal married Rukmini. They went to the wedding with their entire army, each of them. And with a full complement of military conveyances. So, you go with, I presume, all your elephants, all your horses, your chariots ready for battle. They're going to the wedding that way. This is from the 58th chapter of the 10th canto of Bhagavad Gita. Nevertheless, what transpired, and this is what transpired, and this is where that resentment could possibly have come in for King Shishupal. And here's the description from the Bhagavatam, the moment when Krishna takes action. Lifting the princess, meaning Rukmini, onto his chariot, whose flag bore the emblem of Garuda, Lord Madhava drove back the circle of kings with Balaram in the lead. He slowly exited like a lion, removing his prey from the midst of jackals. That's what actually happened. And there was Shishupal, all the kings that had decided they were going to work with him to make sure that they defeated Krishna. It just didn't happen. We just read how it actually transpired. Krishna just took hold of Rukmini, lifted her onto a chariot, and then with Balaram's help, they drove back the other kings, and he just exited very calmly. So, in the present, and this discussion that we're having of what King Shishupal is saying to this assembly at the Rajasuya sacrifice, there's purport given to text 31. I actually thought there wasn't purport, so maybe I got it from a different acharya, but this was a purport that was given. Shishupal was an avowed enemy of Krishna for many reasons, especially because of Krishna having stolen Rukmini from that marriage ceremony. Therefore, he could not tolerate such honor to Krishna and glorification of Krishna. He couldn't tolerate it. So instead of being happy to hear the glories of Krishna when Sahadev spoke them, he became very angry. So this was, I found where my source for this was Srila Prabhupada writing in Krishna book. So looking at that question we asked, if you've been treated unjustly in the past and you feel resentment, do you have a right to raise to feel inclined to protest? Well, King Shishupal decided he was going to protest. And there's this proprietary, or whether it's the correct thing to have done, of this protest is examined by Srila Vishwanath. And is quoted also by Srila Prabhupada. If Shishupal had argued earlier against Lord Krishna receiving the first worship, and another person had been selected, the sacrifice would have proceeded normally. It still would have gone on. This Rajasuya sacrifice to establish Maharaj Yudhisthira as the preeminent monarch in the world. Therefore, Shishupal allowed Krishna to be elected, waited until worship was over, and then he spoke. And why he raised his protest at that particular time was that he was hoping in this way to demonstrate that the sacrifice was now spoiled. That was his intention. Thus, he would ruin the endeavor of Maharaj Yudhisthira. So this was his intention. The question was, is somebody like that inclined to protest, or, should they protest? So this was what his thinking was. He was actually going to spoil the entire sacrifice, but not do it raising his protest at the time of the choice of Krishna, but wait until the end, because then he thought that will ruin the sacrifice. So this was his thinking. Now, that this is improper is it's visible in the fact that when the sacrifice was done and completed, and this is from the Srimad Bhagavatam earlier on, this is how it was written, nearly all who were present, there was a joining of palms and reverential exclamations of obeisances to you, all victory to you, when they saw Lord Krishna honor by Maharaj Yudhisthira. So actually everybody was very pleased. Obeisances to you, all victory to you. And what they'd witnessed, and this was part of the sacrifice, Maharaj Yudhisthira had bathed Lord Krishna's lotus feet. There was a presentation of silken garments to Krishna and precious jeweled ornaments. And it was after that everybody was quite joyful, except the person who had felt that he was not properly treated because of Krishna's stealing Rukmini, felt resentment, and this was how he was determined to spoil the sacrifice. So, now in addition to Srila Vishwanath giving another meaning to King Shishupal's words, because remember in the beginning I said, here's King Shishupal saying that, basically the intelligence of everyone that's present there is eroded. Why are they accepting the words of a foolish boy like Sahadev about Krishna? Remember, there was another explanation given by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur that when he spoke to all those associates, all those kings that came to help him at the time when they were trying to make sure that they would repel Krishna and Balaram and that Rukmini would be kept for King Shishupal, what he said to Duryodhana and those other kings was, do not regard these as a child's words. They are literally the words of the Vedas. So we can understand that it's certainly through examining the words of Sahadev and their being so closely intertwined with Krishna's very own statements that in the Vedas, that indeed this is actually the case. They literally are the words of the Vedas, what Sahadev spoke. So that's trying to look at the two verses today. If there's something that's come to mind and some query or something to expand the discussion, please feel free. It's quite, I think, relevant kind of topic.
Thank you for your class, Mataji.
Thank you for listening. It's very kind of you. Thank you for listening.
It's super interesting. There's a lot of things, questions that come to mind, but the main thing that comes to my mind is, what would you say that we're to learn from the example of Sushipal? Because if everything is not different in the Lord, that includes him. If he's the beginning, middle, and end of every being, then he's the beginning, middle, end of Sushipal also.
Yes.
So, and in the Upanishads, it says everything is controlled and owned by the Lord. So these is all coming from the Lord still, even Sushipal. His actions are, I guess, Leela, so that we can learn like a big play. So he's playing the bad guy, but actually he's not different than the Lord Satchidananda in essence, the essence of the soul. So what should we learn from looking at his external actions, what Sushipal is being portrayed as?
What is your thought on that?
My thought?
Yeah, because you heard breakdown. So.
My thought was how in R&B they have this song the line.
Talk with the mic.
Oh, in R&B music they have this song, and it's a line that says everybody plays the fool sometimes. You know, everybody plays the fool sometimes. You know, so for me, I can just look at Sushupal and think, well, I can see parts of myself. I have to. And if anyone looks at, I won't think about other people, but I'll think about myself and say, well, what part of me is like Sushupal? And then after that, just take sannyas.
After that, what?
Just take sannyas.
Well, that's a bit of a jump. That's a bit of a jump. um, yeah, it's an interesting thing that somebody plays out their inner conflict or anger on a public level. On a public level. So, I mean, different personalities are different. He was in the royal order. So it means that he's, got Kshatriya qualities, meaning some sort of heroism, some sort of desire to control. And it's, in one sense, it would be natural to, be protesting something that, I mean, being in the royal order, he could challenge. And that's what he's been. In fact, he challenged Krishna to a fight 17 times. There was no defeat for him, even though he was defeated 17 times. There was no giving up. So that's part of the Kshatriya nature. So from that perspective, one can understand, but there's a certain impropriety when actually a religious ceremony has been performed and it's actually been completed and the protocol has been followed, and then somebody raises a voice of dissent. It's instead of having the effect of actually harming the sacrifice, because that's complete, it's more likely to shine a light on the personality who's raising the dissent and actually think something's not in order with this personality. So in terms of identifying with somebody carrying anger because of perhaps not being treated correctly, some unjust treatment. In his case, it wasn't completely unjust because, again, there's that kind of kidnapping is permissible in the Kshatriya category. It's not done so often. I think it's like Rakshasa style, but it can be done. I mean, it's not a preferred method, but it can be done. So it's still permissible. But he took it personally. And it's understandable that a person could feel a little, well, somewhat miffed. And in his case, it could be, resentment or anger. So then it becomes a question of self-control. Because to carry ill feeling towards somebody, of course, in this case, it's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but to carry ill feeling, one has to consider in what situation are you going to permit yourself to express that ill feeling. Generally, it's kept in private. Generally. I mean, he's a king, so he could do some moves, as he did 17 times, having a fight with Lord Krishna, literally with his armies. But to do it at the end of a religious ceremony does not seem to have propriety. Yeah, so that's just a thought on this idea that one may oneself be able to identify with his feelings, but then there's that kavit that I'm introducing that one has to consider the circumstance and whether it's proper or not to bring out one's personal feelings. It's like very important, yeah. It always then puts the spotlight on oneself, and is that then going to be a good spotlight or not? And if one's pouring out negativity and doing it publicly, it generally is not. Generally. Yeah, it's something better done in private, worked out in private. This is a view.
And one other thing that came to mind was how Krishna says, I'm the subduer. In time is the subduer of all things. So a lot of times, say conflict resolution. Sometimes it makes me think that sometimes it's better to give things time and ask for Krishna to intervene. It's just
That's an interesting point. Yeah, Krishna meant it that, he's, that's an interesting point, that there could be conflict, and over time, because Krishna is time, that even the conflict can be subdued. That's a nice point. Thank you for that one. So I guess we can end on that happy note. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.